Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the next video for Communications 1. This is the second Illustrator introductory video. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining more about Illustrator and also how to align your transect photos. So the first thing I want to do is we've created this sheet. We're actually not going to use this anymore, but this is a really helpful way of understanding how the program kind of works. And what we're going to be using for this task is a template that I've put up onto Canvas. So if you go to Canvas, just going to close these, and you go from 11128 Communications 1, and then you go to Modules, where you can find all the weekly tasks and everything. There are a series of videos for you to watch on Rhino, which you should be watching this week as well, and a series of videos on Illustrator, which aren't up yet, because I'm still recording them. But you want to be downloading, for this video, 11128 Transect template. So this is what we're going to be using to align our photos. So download that. And once you have downloaded that, go obviously into your downloads, and just open up that file, the 11128 Transect template. So open that up, and what you'll see is that we've got the same page size as the A2, so everything I've done the same, but we have two rectangles on the screen. So these two rectangles are the size of your transect, so 2 meters by 10 meters, so 2 by 10, but they've been scaled down to a scale of 1 to 20. I'll be going over more about how scaling works, but essentially what this is this is a representation of a 2 meter by 10 meter space, but shrunken down to fit onto an A2 page. So we're essentially creating a plan of our transect at 1 to 20. And I'll show you how to do this yourself at a later time. So this was done in Rhino, and then I imported it into Illustrator, which I'll also be showing you how to do. Okay, so the other main thing that has changed are the layers that I've got. So you can see on the previous video, it just said layer 1, and in this template, you've got 3 layers. So photos, transect template, and photo template. So this is a good opportunity now, I think, to discuss how layers work in Adobe Illustrator. So in the same way that we were layering the precedent drawings in week 1, Illustrator can also layer different things on top of one another in the program. And so the way they work is they kind of stack like they do in physical space. So this layer is on the bottom, photo template, transect templates in the middle, and the photo layer is on the top. So whatever I put on the photo layer will be above the transect template, and transect template will be above the photo template. You can move these layers around by pulling and dragging them. So that's where you can change the order. And when you change the order of your layers, it's like you're moving a sheet of trace paper out from your drawing and placing it on top of your other work. So just treat these as if they are sheets of trace paper and you're stacking them on top of one another. The good thing about this program, though, is that you can turn these layers on and off, and you can lock them as well, so you can start to draw. So if I hover over this top rectangle, you can see that it's going to highlight blue. And if I hover over the bottom rectangle, you can see that it's going to highlight red. That shows us a little preview of what layers these two rectangles are on. So this top rectangle that highlights blue is on the photo template layer, which you can see there is marked with a little blue color. And this rectangle highlights red, and you can see there that it's on the red layer. You can also select that rectangle and it will become permanently highlighted red. And when I do that, you'll notice that there's a little red square that appears next to the transect template layer. So if I deselect by clicking away from that rectangle, that little red square will disappear. If I click on the blue rectangle, a little blue square will appear on that layer. What that's telling me is it's telling me what layer the object that I've selected on is on. So if I drag and select the top rectangle, again, that'll highlight blue. And if I select them both by dragging and clicking, there's a red and a blue rectangle and a red and a blue square. Now, there's nothing on the photos layer, so there's actually nothing to select on that layer. So nothing to show you what's green, but that's how the layers can indicate what you've selected is on what layer. Now, the other thing I can do with Adobe Illustrator is I can lock these layers. So at the moment, if I click on the top rectangle and I click and I drag and I unclick, I can actually move these around. And we don't want to move these around for now because I've set them up in a position that I want you to place your transects in. So we want them to be locked so they can't move around as we're placing our photos. So to get it back to the way it was, if you have moved it on your keyboard, hit Control Z if you're on PC or Command Z if you're on Mac. So just go Command Z, 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 and it's going to go back to where it was. The other way to do this is to go up to the top here where it says Edit, and you just go Redo or Undo, and it will undo or redo whatever you've done. So to lock our layers, if you click in this little space here, where there's an empty square, if you click on that square, a little padlock will appear. That means now that I can't select whatever is on that layer. So if I drag my mouse over the whole screen, you can see that the bottom rectangle is still being highlighted because that layer is not locked, but the blue layer is locked, so I can't select that anymore. And in order to unlock that layer, I just click that padlock again and it unlocks, and now I can select it again. You can click and lock both of those layers, and you can see they've been deselected because they're both locked and I can't select them. And if you want to be fast with your locking layers, because we're going to be using a lot of layers, you can actually just click and drag your mouse over that area and they'll all lock or unlock. So in the same way that you can lock layers, you can also hide layers. So this little eyeball icon next to the layer can toggle the visibility of the layer. So if I click that little eye icon, you can see that the top rectangle's disappeared. And if I click this one, then the bottom rectangle disappears. And I can bring them back in the same way that I can lock and unlock them. So click the little eyeball icon and they both reappear. That's going to be really useful and really helpful in just a moment. Great. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to start to place our photos that we took on the site visit into Illustrator. So I've created a third layer for you guys to use, and it's labeled Photos. If you want to create additional layers, which that's totally fine for this, down the bottom of the Layers panel is a few little icons. There's a Create New Sublayer, which is not going to be useful for now. Create New Layer icon, and a Delete Selection. So you can actually delete layers as well with a little bin icon. So to create a new layer, just click on the little plus symbol down here, and a layer will just appear with a preset color. Then to change the name of that layer, just double click on where it says Layer 4. So double click on the writing. If you double click elsewhere, it'll bring up a different dialog box, which I'll show you in a second. But to click on the words, that'll change. So we can go Photos 2 or something. Then to change the properties of that layer, if you double click on the layer away from the writing, you can change the color of the layer. So let's say we want it to be magenta, and you can change some other settings, but don't worry about those. And you can also rename it here. So if I wanted that to be caps, I can rename it and go OK. And now it's Photos 2 in caps and it's magenta. So you can edit the layer like that. But for now, we don't want that layer. So I'm just going to select Photos 2, then go down the bottom to the little bin icon and just delete that. One more thing about layers that would be useful is if I unlock the two rectangle layers, like so, and this little circle here, if I click on that circle, that's going to select everything that's on that layer, which for now doesn't seem very useful because I've only got one object on that layer. But when you've got lots of complex digital line work, which we will be doing in a few weeks, that can become really useful to select everything that's just on that layer. Of course, you can also lock your other layers and then drag and select over your whole artboard, but there are specific scenarios where that's more useful. So that should summarize everything we need to know about layers. So let's bring our photos in. So to bring our photos in, select the photos layer on the template and just lock the other two layers. So your layers should look like this. Now, I've previously already imported my photos from my phone onto my computer. There are a variety of ways to do that, and I'm not going to go into them because you can Google that if you're confused. So I've placed my photos into my downloads folder, and these are all the photos that I've taken of my transect. So to get these into Illustrator, let's go back to the program. With our photos layer selected, we want to go up the top again to File, and we want to go down to Place. This allows us to place different kinds of media, other objects, other vectors and things like that into the program. And so for this purpose, we want to be placing our photos. So click on Place. And now I've already selected my downloads folder. So just navigate to where you've uploaded your photos to. So in my case, into this little zip folder here. And these are all the photos that I took. So I want to click on the bottom one, hold Shift, and click on the top one. And you can see that they all become highlighted. Before you click on Place, there should be a little option down the bottom. This should appear on PC as well, which says Show Import Options. Click on this for now, because that'll give us additional options for when we want and how we want to import these photos. So with all your photos selected and Show Import Options selected as well, go Place. It'll take a second to register that. Great. Now that's done, I've got a little icon next to my mouse that says 1 of 29. That means that I have selected 29 photos to place on my Illustrator page. So it's a little bit tedious, but what we want to do is we want to just take our mouse away from the artboard because we don't have to place them on top of our white sheet here. Just take them away into this kind of gray space. To zoom out again, hold Alt on your keyboard and just scroll away from the interface. Just find a spot and just click. And this is going to be essentially importing each of those photos into Illustrator. It's important to click for now in the same spot, so your mouse should kind of snap to one of the corners of the photos as you're placing them, and that will just neatly place all of your photos in the same area. Now, if your computer's like mine, with that many photos, it's going to slow down a tiny bit. That's okay. So you'll notice before how there was a red and blue icon appearing when I selected these two rectangles. Now when I select the photos, there's going to be a green outline. And that's good because that means that my photos have placed on my green layer. If you have made a mistake at this stage and you haven't placed your photos onto the photo layer, there's ways you can very easily change the layers of objects in Illustrator. So if I unlock all my layers, just like before, if I select what's on the photo layer, you can see that there's a green square on my photos layer. That means I've selected an object on that layer, in the same way that there's a blue square and a red square. If I select one of the photos, I can actually click on the square, the little green square that appears, and drag it to another layer. So you can see when I drag it down to the red layer, there's a red square, or I drag it to the blue layer, there's a blue square. So if I drag that onto the red layer, then that photo is actually going to change layers. Now, when I hide my photos layer, this photo is now on the red layer. To bring it back to the green layer, I just select the photo, click on the little red square, make sure my photos layer is visible, and just drag that square back up to the photos layer. So then go back and lock your other layers again. Now, what I want to do is I want to drag and select the photos. So if I click on the photos, I'm only going to select the top photo because I imported 29 photos on top of each other. So I want to drag and select the photos. Once I've done that, they'll all be selected. I want to take my mouse down to the bottom right-hand corner until my mouse turns into that little double arrow icon. Then I want to hold Shift on my keyboard, click that corner, and drag that square up. So you can see that it's resizing at an equal sort of ratio. If I unselect Shift, it's going to drag and resize at whatever ratio it wants, which is bad. We want to keep them the same ratio. So hold Shift and just drag that down. Give your computer a second. There we go. And that's going to resize the photos. That's going to be easier to place them now onto our artboard. You might even want to make them slightly smaller. What we want to do now is essentially lay out the photos so that we can start to draw the transect. So if you remember from the lecture, we showed a series of examples where photos were laid out as such. We want to do the same thing here. So we want to lay our photos out so they're consecutive. And this is essentially like piecing a puzzle together. So you can find this lecture on Canvas. It's been uploaded already. So if you want to have a look at these for yourself, they're online for you to check. So essentially all we want to do now is, again, zoom out, is start to drag these photos away from each other. So to drag them in the way that I'm doing, select the top photo, hold Shift to drag in a straight line, and just drag away. You kind of need to do it simultaneously, so click and hold Shift at the same time, and you can drag them in a straight line. Now this is just going to give us a little bit of room to breathe. So again, select these photos and just keep moving them away. And Illustrator is great because it gives you little snaps, so you can see that there's a little purple kind of dimension properties appearing. That just shows us that we're spacing them out evenly. Now, if your phone is like mine, it's going to import all of your photos at like not necessarily consecutive order. They might be consecutive, but in my case, mine weren't. So it really is a case of piecing together the puzzle. So when I took my transect as well, I tried to follow a little stream. Okay, it's getting quite long, so I'm just going to select these, hold Shift and drag them down, and just keep moving them away from each other. So I tried to follow a bit of a stream when I was taking my transect, and so I'm going to try and recreate that stream using these photos. It's important to take your time with this process because the way you lay your photos out now is going to affect a lot of your drawing in the future. So it's really worth taking the time now to ensure that you're laying your photos out kind of either in an interesting and investigative way or in at least a very accurate way. So without too much overlap or repeating of content in the photos. Okay, there we go. We made it to the final photo. So essentially this is where the transect becomes a kind of a process of kind of reassembling a puzzle in a way. So what we want to do is we want to zoom back in and we want to start to find kind of similar objects. In my case, my phone also rotates photos, depending on how you took the photo. So it can get a little bit frustrating, but just go slow and take your time and just do it carefully. So now we're kind of just looking for similarities in photos. So I can see that this pipe here is the same as this pipe here. And you can see that there's a lot of extra content in the photos. In fact, I'm going to take these two photos and just take them back to the artboard, just so this is a bit easier to see. So just dragging them over, zooming in and out. So now I want to lay these two photos together. So I think the best way to do this, again, is to find a similar object in the two photos. So for now, this is this little curved shell here, and this is the same little curved shell there. So I'm going to hover over that little shell, click, and then drag the photo over to that little shell there. Now you'll notice that this photo has gone behind this photo. There are two ways to get this photo on top of this other photo. One way would be to create a new layer. So hitting the little plus icon, go over to the layer, call this photo 2, then select that bottom photo, and like I showed you before, drag that little green square up, and now photo 2 is above the layer named photos, and so this layer is above this layer, and that's going to put the photo on top. But because we have so many photos, it could be a little bit tedious to do that with layers. So I'm just going to take this photo back to that other layer and delete that layer. You can see it's gone on top, but there's actually an easier way to get these two images kind of flipping between each other. If I select the image that's now on the bottom, and I right click that image, then I go down to the arrange option, I can push that photo backwards or forwards. So I can go bring to front, bring forward, send backward, or send to back. So bring forward and send backward will push the photo back kind of in just one object. That might make more sense later. But bring to front and send to back will send it all the way to the back or all the way to the front. So if I click bring to front, that photo is going to go on top of the other photo. And this is a good way to start to lay out your photos in a way that's going to be kind of a bit more accurate. So we can kind of flip between them and see what the best photo for being on top is. The next thing I want to do is just get really close in and start to align the edges of the photos as accurately as I can. This process may involve some kind of resizing of the image as well. So not every photo is going to be taken at the same kind of height from the ground. So to resize it, just like we did before, select the image you want to resize, hold shift and just drag it so it's a bit larger. And you may need to just wiggle around with this process. In some cases they won't align properly, so that's okay. You can also rotate the images. So if I select the image and I hover over the edge, this little kind of flipped icon appears. So there's the resizing icon. This is the rotating icon. I can rotate my image to better suit the kind of the positioning of these two things. And maybe I want to rotate it a bit like that. Just go in and keep resizing and fitting until it fits properly. And once again, take your time with this process. It can be a little bit tedious, but again, it's worth doing it properly. So I'm just going to undo what I just did. I'm just going to drag it so it's roughly about there. It's okay if it's not perfect, but again, just find a good spot to kind of align it, and that, at this distance begins to look quite good. Now it's just a process of finding more and more photos that match up with this. So I can see that this rock here is this rock here, so I'm going to drag this photo over and just keep on aligning it. So I'm going to arrange and bring this to the front and start to lay things over the top of each other. Once that's kind of aligned, I'm going to go arrange and send it back and send that photo back. And I actually prefer that kind of transition there. So I'm just going to keep doing this until I complete as much of my transect as I want. If you want to be really pedantic with how aligned your photos are, you can change the opacities of your images. So if I click on an image, I get a series of options up here. So they change depending on what I've got selected. So if I had selected a line, that would change. And I'm selecting a photo, so they've got their own options. I can actually go over to here to where it says opacity 100%. If I click on this little arrow, I get a little slider bar down here. If I click and drag that slider bar, then my photo is going to become more or less transparent. So this is a really useful way of kind of also aligning your photos. So you can see here that the top image is slightly misaligned from the bottom photo. So I can actually rotate this image and start to align it even closer. This is a really great process to get really accurate alignment of photos. Once I'm satisfied with how it's aligned, I can just click on the image again and bring that opacity back up to 100. And now it's just going to be, that much more aligned, which is good. And it's okay if your photos are kind of jumbled like this, because as we saw in the precedents, they're all jumbled, and it's just about making a neat sort of projection of what the ground looked like. You also might just be interested in creating a perfectly straight transect. That's okay too. So that's essentially it. Keep doing that until you've aligned your whole transect, and eventually you'll get something that looks like, I think I made a test before. Just let this open. Here we go. So this is the test that I did before. So this is the transect as it's laid out. It's a little messy because I did it, I think, in about 15 minutes. I would advise you to spend much, much more time lining up your transects, but this might be something like what your transect looks like once you're finished. My transect was actually much longer as well, so I went from the water all the way up to the edge of the foreshore. That was much farther than 10 meters. So I actually decided to cut off the transect where it reached the end of the sand. So I'm just going to bring these into my other file. So to do this, if you ever need to do this, I'm just going to select all the photos, go Command C or Control C if you're on PC. Just going to move these away, and then go Command V or Control V if you're on PC. Just give it a second while they import in. They'll import on their own layer. That's okay. So we know how to change the layers. We can drag that little square down, and then we can delete that previous layer. So this would essentially be the extent of my transect. From there, you want to kind of roughly fit it into the template that I've outlined on the artboard here. So that might just involve selecting all of your photos. So if you finish your transect and it's slightly larger than the page, that's okay. You just sort of shrink it down. So to shrink it down, select all those photos and drag it until it kind of fits within the template boundary there. And then just drag it so it roughly fits in. It doesn't have to be perfectly in the rectangle. It's okay if it goes out like mine. And good. Now my transect is sort of laid out on my page. Once I've done that, I want to get rid of the little boundary rectangle that sits on my page. So to do that, I'm just going to hide the transect template layer. Sorry, the photo template layer. And now that rectangle's disappeared. You can hide the transect template layer as well, and so now all you've got is your photos laid out on your A2 page. Now you can either print this out. You'll need to go to Officeworks to print an A2 page. You could print this out and cut out your transect and place it onto nicer drawing paper if you want to start to draw on a nice piece of paper. Or you could sort of cut these photos out manually, or just print and start to draw on that paper if you can get nice enough print paper. But essentially you want to be now redrawing your transect by hand underneath. For this process, again, you don't have to draw absolutely every piece of detail, but you might be focusing on kind of specific elements as you draw it. So perhaps you'll focus on the rocks and the water, or perhaps you don't want to draw the rocks at all and you only want to draw the sand and the water. Maybe you're only focusing on pollution and particulates in the sand, and so figure out what you want to represent. But eventually, before next week, we want to be looking at transects that look something like this. So this student has focused on just the water, and they've just drawn the outline of the rocks where the water meets the rocks, and anything that kind of sits within the water is less detailed. And so they kind of are looking at this relationship between the water and the rocks here. Again, you can kind of look through these precedents to see what kind of things the students focus on and where they left kind of blank white space and where they kind of focused on drawing kind of more detail. But again, we're going to send out a weekly task with a bit more information on how to do this. Okay, so once that's finished, you will need to export your Illustrator file. So to do that, you want to go up to File, and you can also save it here. So you can go Save. So if we want to save our template, that would be a good idea. Just going to let this load. Okay, and once that's saved, that'll continue saving in the background. So you can see here. So this is also how you access your additional files. If you've got multiple files open, there'll be different tabs. So that'll become more useful later. So after I've kind of saved it, I want to go up to File, And to get a PDF of this file, so we typically print in PDFs, you actually want to go save as. So to export it, would export the file as sort of PNGs or JPEGs, but oddly enough, to get it as a PDF, you need to go save as. So file, save as, save on the computer, in my downloads, that's good. Rename it something, so I would say 11128 surname, so your surname, and then underscore your first name. That's fine, and then down here where it says format, click on that, and there'll be an option labeled Adobe PDF. So you want to save it as a PDF format. That's good, so now it'll change to .pdf at the top. We've only got one artboard, so this is all fine, don't worry about this, and then just go save. Now when you get to this setting, this is really important actually, and this will be really important for the rest of your files. If you're ever creating PDFs, you want to click on a specific preset that's going to flatten your file. I'll explain what that means a bit more later. For now, whenever you're saving as a PDF, click the drop-down menu and select PDF X3 2002. That's going to remove any kind of editing capabilities from the program, but it'll make your file far smaller. So once you select that preset, don't worry about anything else. Click on Save PDF. Now it's really important that you've saved your file as an Illustrator file before saving it as a PDF, because once it's saved as PDF, you won't be able to edit it anymore. So if I go to my downloads, I've got my 11128 Transect template AI, so that's Adobe Illustrator, and I've also got my my surname, first name PDF. So remember, save it as an Illustrator file and then save it as a PDF, otherwise you'll lose all your progress. So you can click that, and then here's your PDF. So this is printable now. It's an A2 printable page. So you can go and print this off at Officeworks, and they'll know how to print this off for you. Once that's done, you can start to draw your transects. I'll be making more videos on the editing and sort of illustrating capabilities of Illustrator at a later time, as we get into digital line work next week. So for next week, watch the Rhino videos as well as sort of drawing your transects, and you'll be good to go for the next task. So thank you all for listening. Sorry, it was a long one, and I'll see you next week.